and he will be presenting the building decarbonization, which we are being led to believe that this is a brand new presentation, has not been seen before. So enjoy it. And just a few housekeeping rules. So during your presentation, please keep your microphones muted. And if you have any questions, you are welcome to write them in the box, in the messages box, or we will have a Q&A session at the end as well, if you would like to ask questions verbally by turning on your camera on and your microphone on. And we are also sharing with you the upcoming our seminars. And obviously, if you have any questions after that, you can also email us as well. And the presentation will be available in all the slides will be available. Is that right, Frank? Are we allowed to still share the slides with the attendees?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so we will be recording this session, and then I hope it's all okay with everybody. And then it will be available on our YouTube channel, on our Ashrae Midlands chapter website, for you to listen to it later or share with your colleagues and friends. And yes, we have the events on our website, what is coming up on each month, October, November, all the way to June next year. And you will receive invitations later on. And if you stay in touch with us through LinkedIn, which Joshua kindly updates on a very regular basis. And we also have a Twitter, Ashrae UK page. Again, all the events and announcements are published here. And we also have a mailing list that you can sign up to, and you can receive all the regular updates from Ashrae UK Midlands chapter. So, and thank you very much to all our sponsors. We have the gold sponsor Vexo and silver sponsor IES and many bronze sponsors. But before we start, I just would like to say a few words about Frank. Frank has got an amazing biography. I don't want to go through it all, but just a few things. He has been members of Ashrae for 50 years. And he's got 40 years of experience in the building services industry. And as I have mentioned, he is one of our distinguished lecturers at Ashrae Region 14. And he's also a member of the UK Department of Health Engineering Knowledge Group. And he has also recently created Ashrae Building Decarbonization Task Force. He's also one of the members within this decarbonization task force. So all the information I think Frank is going to give us will be all literally as the information is developing probably in the industry. Thank you very much, Frank. I will stop sharing now. You can share.
That's great. Thank you very much for that introduction. Can you see my screen? I've got a picture of Media City up there.
Yes, we can, yes.
Oh, good, brilliant, okay. Yes, what I was going to talk about today was about the new Ashrae Task Force for Building Decarbonisation. It was actually set up by the current president and last president because with COP26 coming up and with Ashrae's ambitions to reduce carbon across the planet, this needed some big resource behind it. So they set this up as a special task force. And as it says, I'm on that task force, which is great. It's a topic which I'm very keen on myself. I've spent a lot of time designing net zero carbon buildings and low carbon buildings, as probably a lot of us have really. But we're moving into an era where every new building has to be net zero, and the buildings around us, the old ones, have to be brought up to that standard as well, and all that within the next 30 years, as you know, for 2050. So today I was just going to run through where we are with this task force. It's not been going that long. It's been going about a year. So we have to, oops, not, give control. I'm really controlling this on. That's it. Good, thanks. Okay, I'll just put copyright on this because it's an Ashrae presentation when I'm doing as a DL. And I just want to acknowledge the main task force committee, which I'm not on the main committee. I'm on one of the subgroup committees, but this is the main committee, and you can see that on the website. So we've got some really top leadership there from Ashrae taking this forward. A lot of ex-presidents and future presidents, actually. And what I wanted to say is there's quite a lot of resources on this already starting to grow on the web page. And this is the link if you want to look for it. You go on there to that link on Ashrae's webpage, and you'll see what's happening with data going on. Though I have to say a lot of material is on Basecamp because we're using it as working material, and that's not really available openly yet. We're sharing papers, we're developing papers, and eventually this will end up on the main site as an infographic that people can dive into and use the information. And there's a whole range of resources which will be developed, including CPD and training. So what I'd like to tell you is actually 140 volunteers from around the world on this, including me, and some from our own region, of course, as you'd expect. And what we're doing is we're determining and engaging with other organisations that have pertinent skills, knowledge and expertise, obviously the likes of SIBSI and others that we know, and REVA. We want to provide information to policymakers on how they might achieve the goals that they've established. I think you'll all be surprised and probably pleased to see Boris Johnson standing up there in the United Nations Assembly telling them all that they should be net zero and they better get on with it, when we all live in a country where we're not doing anything like that. But maybe he's going to start, so that's good. So we need to tell him how to do that. And we want to provide recommendations and best practices for our construction industry so that we actually do achieve net zero. We've got to look at the existing portfolio of technical resources. Do we actually know what we're doing? Do we need to package these up in a way that can be useful to people? Make sure we got the tools out there, and obviously a lot of you guys know about the energy modelling tools and CFD we use. But these have got to point people in the right direction. Make sure that things are cost effective, not wasting money on, for example, solar panels in an area that's always rainy. Solar panels work fine, of course, in the right place, but if they're in the wrong direction or whatever. So we've got to make sure we've got the tools that point people towards the right technologies and they reduce operational carbon in buildings. And then identify any knowledge gaps, make sure we can fill those, and that might include doing some research, and there is a group looking at that. So this task force is going to achieve these objectives through a number of working groups, and I'm going to today just go quickly through those working groups to show what they're doing. And we want to identify key areas of concern which we need to address, because although some of us are doing this kind of thing and have been doing it for a while, and I say that because the Southport Eco Centre on the right there is one of my projects. It's not a big building, actually. It's less than £1 million construction work. It's a new build in Southport. It's net zero carbon. That was constructed about 10 years ago. So we kind of know how to do it. Maybe if it was a big £100 million building, it might be more difficult, but we can still do it, of course. But we want to make sure that this kind of information is available for everybody to use, and that it can be done, as I say, cost effectively. And that building is certainly very cost effective. So incidentally, it's a very well constructed, well insulated and sealed building. It's got a heating system in the floor, low temperature heating system with heat pumps connected to that wind turbine that you can see there. And the heat pumps are connected to ground source. And this is next to Southport Beach. So very effective and successful little project, that one. We already have some position documents which are published and on the website. So we've made a note of what they are, and you can see those. It's the resiliency and the built environment one, and that's been done in conjunction with SIBSI. We've got a document on climate change. A position document, by the way, is where Ashrae and has a committee that puts together a statement on where we are, what we're doing with it, what our intent is. And if you read those, you'll see they're quite strategic. We've got one on energy efficiency in buildings, and there's an important one on refrigerants and their responsible use because of the phase out of some refrigerants and a phase in of other refrigerants. We want to make sure that people understand the implications. I mean, particularly some of the new refrigerants, for example, are quite flammable. We need to make sure that they're controlled properly and they don't leak and cause fires. We're also looking at Ashrae public policy issue briefs. There's one on building decarbonisation, resiliency in the built environment, climate change, of course, the big topic at the moment. And I was discussing this with Ashrae today, and Ginger Scoggins is coming across. She's treasurer at the moment, which means she's probably going to be the president after next, not next year, but the year after. She's coming across to COP26 in November to represent Ashrae, and Ashrae are doing quite a lot up there in Glasgow, so that's good, representing us, but also pushing on this agenda. Again, looking at refrigerants and their responsible use, and utilising energy metrics and building benchmarking to improve whole building energy performance. It's quite surprising, of course. A lot of people don't know how much energy their building uses, and what they might do to reduce that, and what benefit there would be in that, either in costs or in comfort. But these are the kind of things we're sorting out. And then we've also had a look at what standards are available at the moment, and there'll be more standards obviously coming through after this work is complete. But we do have some pretty effective standards. Obviously, Energy Standard 90.1, that's what Ashrae's developed, and it's used around a lot of the world, actually, not just in North America. We don't tend to use it here because we have a building regulation part L for energy, and of course in Europe as well, they've got similar energy standards for countries. So it's worth reflecting that the energy standard which Ashrae has is different, because it looks at the total energy consumption in the building. So part L, as you are aware, looks in environmental energy, heating, lighting, cooling, air conditioning, ventilation. It doesn't really look at the plug loads. The plug loads are exempt. So you could have some buildings, and hospitals are a good example actually, where there's a tremendous amount of energy used by the process loads in the building, but they're not taken into account in any kind of legal code at the moment in the UK or in Europe, because Part L doesn't cover that. So whilst we might encourage people to use efficient equipment, there's no kind of legal push to do that. And indeed, I'm sure many of you, like me, have seen that as an opportunity. So if you can pick up all of the waste heat from an MRI scanner or another piece of hospital equipment that's generating a lot of waste heat, and put that back into your heating system, it's basically zero carbon heat. So that's great. You can really get your own figures down by using that waste heat from somewhere else, because that somewhere else is not really included in the numbers. And I think another good example of that might be a data center. As you can appreciate, the data center has an enormous electrical load from the data equipment. And then we, of course, put in more equipment, HVAC, cooling, air conditioning, air movement, ventilation, to reduce the temperature load in there. And that secondary area is energy which would be covered by Part L. Whereas if you look at the data information published by Ashrae, and included in 90.1, of course, it's looking at the whole lot, the energy used by the data equipment plus the HVAC. By the way, it's important to say here and now, if we don't understand that, but when we talk about zero carbon, we are talking about everything, not just the building environmental energy loads, but the process loads within, transportation to and from the building, the construction of the building itself. Basically anything that produces carbon has to be zero by 2050. That's what we're being told by the climate change scientists. So it's something we need to deal with. But I'm mentioning it here because we do need to understand these codes are slightly different in the way they're written. We've got the 90.2, which is low-rise residential buildings. Ashrae's also looking at standard methods of determining, expressing and comparing building energy performance and greenhouse gas emissions. And 189.1, which is often referred to as Ashrae's sustainability standard, looks at the design of high performance green buildings, but excludes low-rise residential actually. And then they have a separate one for low-rise residential, which isn't mentioned here. And 189.3, it looks at the design, construction and operation of sustainable high-performance healthcare facilities, or hospitals in our language. So they're two good documents produced by TC 2.8, our sustainability committee, technical committee, and they have been updated several times actually. But that's a very useful standard to use if we're trying to get buildings to these sort of levels. And then finally, this new standard that's coming through, SPC 228P, is a standard method of evaluating zero net energy and zero net carbon building performance. So that's available. We can have a look at that and see what you think. So that's where Ashrae are at the moment, and we looked at that and thought, where do we go next? So this task force was put together in spring 2021. So we've been going just for this year, really. And as I said, it's an initiative of President Chuck Gulledge, which, as he was leaving office, and the new President Mick Schwedler, Mick's president now, as you know. In fact, we had him at our CRC last week, didn't we? Jurisdictions globally are confronting climate change and recognizing that building decarbonisation is an important component in their efforts. It has to be done. And that's because worldwide, the building sector accounts for around 40% of all energy-related carbon emissions, and buildings remain a major sector that lacks sufficient mitigation policies. And that 40% varies, of course, from one place to another. But in the UK, I think it's more like 50% actually. It depends how well we're doing with our efforts to reduce carbon, but it's certainly around the half of all carbon emissions mark. The rest, of course, being aviation, transportation, and manufacturing, that kind of thing. As a standards authority for energy usage in buildings, Ashrae recognises that our long-standing initiatives in energy efficiency should be expanded to building decarbonisation. So this is a big step forward, and it's just tremendous that we're taking this lead worldwide to really say we do need to look at the building sector properly and we need to decarbonise it, hence the name of the task force. So we started off with a research knowledge hub, which is basically looking at what policies and standards are available. And that hub is going to collaborate with other working groups and affiliated groups worldwide, you know, SIBSI, for example, and others, to identify and archive resources available. And it's all the usual stuff. We want definitions sorted. What is net zero? Net zero is actually not that easy to define. Are we talking about the building? We're talking about the supply to the building. We talk the resource. Does the electrical supply come from a net zero source? Must it be at the boundary of the building? And believe me, people have debated this ad infinitum. And at the end of the day, we actually want to be net zero and not keep discussing ways of doing it. There's literature around what have we got available to us, what standards, what guidelines, and what are our measurements, what research has been done and what research is going on, and where are the gaps. We probably need to do some more. And then we want to look at the policy goals of every country, every state, area, every city, and see how they fit together. And of course, you're in Loughborough, and there's well, some of us, Manchester's another city that's really declared that it wants to be zero carbon, I think by 2039, Liverpool as well. So these cities are stepping up and saying these things, but do they know what it means? Are they really going to do it? But these are policy goals. And in addition to this, there's 8 technical groups, and I want to say that those technical 8 groups cover 8 different areas, which I'm going to go through now. Excuse me, and I'm going to tell you which one I'm on and what I'm doing. So the first one is the Operational Carbon Working Group, and this is the group I've joined because, as the title suggests, it really talks about how much carbon the building uses when it operates, and that's what we as designers work out. You know, have we got a boiler, gas-fired boiler? Have we got a heat pump? You know, and how much carbon do those different things produce? So we want to identify the issues in migrating to less carbon-intensive energy sources. So that might be when we're doing a new building. You know, are we doing the right thing if we put a gas supply in, because we're kind of locking them into using a fossil fuel for a long time, life of a boiler being maybe 20 years, and when that's finished, do they find another boiler and still use gas, or do they try and switch to something else? So at the moment, we don't really advise either way, believe it or not, in construction. Maybe some of you do, but interestingly enough, there's a very big housing estate being constructed near me, about 1,000 houses actually, and they're putting gas supplies and gas boilers into those, which sort of surprised me because those people are going to be snookered in 10 or 15 or 20 years when we either run out of gas or make it very expensive to use, or whatever the policy is to make them stop using it. And then whatever they revert to, I'm not sure, because you can't just change a gas boiler for a heat pump. But I'm throwing that up as an area where we might want to look at that as an issue and how we're going to migrate. Then, of course, we've got all the other existing buildings out there. What do we do about them? Can they just switch to a fantastic heat pump? At the moment, no. But is it the way to go? We want to identify strategies to minimise building electrical consumption during periods when the grid has a higher fraction of carbon emitting energy sources. And I'm sure you know, if you've got GB Grid app on your phone, you can have a look at that and see what we're producing in the way of carbon. And that varies from hour to hour, depending on whether the wind's blowing or the sun's shining or whether the coal-fired plants are fired up. And the carbon can go from low to very high within a few hours. And that is an area we need to look at. But of course, at the same time, our grids don't worry about that. Your house will use what's coming in down the electrical cable. There's no penalty to you for using high carbon, but that may all change. You know, we might find that we're imposing higher tariffs on people in peak carbon hours. And if we're going to do that, that would encourage people to switch to low carbon energy. Maybe that might introduce storage. So there's issues going on there. Want to develop strategies to transition from an energy-based metric to a carbon-based metric. And as you know, if you look at your bills, it's based on kilowatt hours used. So I was looking at mine the other day because my gas one is going up from 14 pence per kilowatt hour to 24 pence a kilowatt hour. It's shocking. I don't know what I'm going to do about that, but it is per kilowatt hour, so it's not based on carbon. But we need to do that if we're going to be serious about carbon. We need to know how much carbon we're using and how much we're paying for it. And we want to refine the approach to metrics to recognise carbon mitigation strategies that reduce overall emissions, including those such as densification and multi-shift operation that reduce overall emissions while intensifying emissions in individual buildings. So in other words, we want to make it worth people's while to become low carbon. Now, this is the team. We've got a number of subgroups on this as well. So I've just highlighted my name, but Dan Null is the chair. He's an engineer based in New York. He's pretty similar to myself, actually, in his age and the experience he's had. Very good leader. And we've been working hard on those items which I've highlighted there. And he set up a number of subgroups again, and we've been discussing stuff. I've just thrown this up. I'm not going to do too much of this for you, but I thought it might be worth diving into the detail and how we do things. But you can see that from this spreadsheet that we list a number of topics. So in this particular meeting, we put down general energy efficiency improvement strategies as a topic to discuss. And below that, we have a transition strategies for carbon fueled space heating and hot water. So that would typically be gas-fired heating, gas-fired central heating in offices or houses. And then going to the right, and I haven't got the whole spreadsheet here, but we've started to fill this in by looking at what, first of all, Ashrae stakeholders challenges. That's really us. You know, we're an Ashrae stakeholder. We're members. We want to use Ashrae information. What's the challenge facing us? And then going to the right, we wanted to look at what real resources are available, and then where the gaps are and so forth. And we have been filling more of this in, but this is one from a meeting we had early last week. So I'll keep it simple. So CM, that's Charlie. He's our one of our guys. He said a standard approach for correlation between carbon reduction measures and energy efficiency measures is an issue, and we should try and think about that because it varies from one place to another. Again, he's based in New York. The next guy, Richard, he said, following Ashrae 90.1's perspective and thinking a cost comparison related to carbon savings, So again, that's a good one, because at the moment it's all how much money can we save by reducing energy. So does Ashrae need to change that to help drive that for us? And then existing utility perspectives for building improvements are associated with energy efficiency and not necessarily related to carbon savings for economic incentives. And you might think, well, that's the same thing, isn't it? But it's not really. You know, we can reduce carbon, but we may not reduce the amount of energy that's used. So if we, for example, put some solar panels on a building, that would give us zero carbon energy, but the energy would be the same as before. Whereas if we insulated a roof, we'd be reducing the energy, and that would also reduce carbon. So it's how we drive those sort of processes. And then the next one was incentives related to government funding, so on. So jumping down a bit, just I'm not going to go through the whole page here, but just wanted to get the flavour of this for you. The next one was on transition strategies for, as I say, carbon fueled space heating, hot water. How do we wean people away from gas, for example, which gas is a fossil fuel? So Charlie said, I haven't seen much interest for that. And speaking as Frank Mills, I haven't either, actually. I have had a call from someone at a hospital who wants to go away from their big steam main around the site to put in a heat pump driven low temperature system, or something like that. And so they're thinking about it, but that's a big change, of course. If steam's going into a building at very high temperature and you want to go for a low temperature system, it's a bit different engineering technology altogether. But I haven't really seen people doing that on any great scale, and it's not something I've seen in the press and nor from government either. So if we're going to get rid of fossil fuels, if that's the intent, when do we start talking about it and how do we do it? And just jumping down there a bit, there's a bit about West Virginia. That's one of the interesting things about Ashrae meetings. It depends where you live. You know, they've got some very different energy mixes in parts, and some use very big coal plants which produce very cheap electricity, actually, and that becomes a problem, you know, for them to switch from coal-fired electric, which is very carbon intensive, would cost them a lot of money. There's places like California, actually, where they've got more power being generated from solar than they need, because it's a very sunny state. They've got some big deserts, and there's other places where they haven't got anything like that, and it certainly wouldn't be viable, and they're still relying heavily on fossil fuels. Again, unlike us, the US doesn't have a big national grid, so they can't really ship solar energy from one place to another. Solar powered electricity, I mean, from one place to another particularly easy. But they can do it within the state, of course, and from one state to the next one. Okay, I've got a lot of stuff there, and I don't really want to go through it all with you because it would take a lot of time, but it's the kind of flavour of the discussions we're having. And you can appreciate, as we do that, engineers are really chipping in with what they're doing, or what they're seeing in their area, and what they're considering as to the way we go forward. And then we're feeding that back into our work, into Ashrae. So it's going to get picked up in the form of standards, guides, technologies, some research maybe, and certainly some sort of CPD to help people. One of the other groups is the embodied carbon group. I'm not on this particular group, but embodied carbon is looking at how much carbon's in the building materials, its products, its services, and the process is really from a cradle to grave point of view, but excludes operational carbon because that's in the other group that I've just talked about. We're dealing with that. So Ashrae's managed to separate these areas and put a technical team that looks at this. Now, this has not been something that's been of particular big interest in the UK, although CIBSE has produced some good information on this, which we can refer to, but it's not something that's cropped up that often on projects I've worked on here. But I am seeing the new NHS Net Zero Hospital standard coming through, and it does involve operational carbon and embodied carbon. So they're pushing this as well. And I guess this will grow into other sectors. So it's probably something we need to understand and see how it applies to us. I would imagine at a first thought, it's all about the concrete, how much concrete you use, how much timber you use, how much steel, how much embodied carbon is in those things. But it does roll out into our area, whether we're using plastic pipe or copper pipe, steel pipe, how much embodied carbon's in the materials of the mechanical electrical systems, what their life cycle is like. Clearly, if you change materials every 10 years, that's got more embodied carbon in it than if you had something that lasted 30 years. So depending on how this rolls out, we could see embodied carbon having a big influence on mechanical and electrical and plumbing systems and the way we design them and the way we operate them. And this group wants to determine a holistic methodology to quantify how materials, products, services and processes from cradle to grave affect climate change, non-renewable resources and the environment. And you may know some of this can be done by computer program already. There are some systems I've used where you can quickly assess your embodied carbon. But once you try and get down to detail and help you in a particular design, it gets a bit more difficult. Possibly quite difficult actually getting information on what embodied carbon there is. Because the other aspect here, which I've skipped over really, is the transportation side. So if you bought a boiler that was made in in the Midlands, in Nottingham or somewhere, that would have a certain amount of transportation carbon associated with it as embodied carbon. But if you bought the boiler from, let's say, China or somewhere, it's got a lot more, and that has to be taken into the calculation. And at the moment, a lot of our goods do come from China, so there's big transportation embodied carbon coming into the calculation. There isn't any quick way out of that because we don't make some of those things. Okay, the next group, which is the third one, of course, is the Building Performance Standards Working Group. And this is looking to provide metrics of measuring and reporting building energy and carbon in existing buildings, determine the need to develop a national building performance standard with carbon targets to meet long-term climate goals. And of course, they will be specifically thinking of North America there, but the same thing will apply to us and to developing economies. Develop a comprehensive guide to successfully implement a building performance standard, including benchmarking, existing stock assessment, compliance, and enforcement of codes and standards, and incentives of financial assistance. So that's an area where we would see material coming through to us that we could apply, in carrying out our job for our clients to assist them to their low carbon future. Good assessment information, benchmarking to compare what they've got with others, what kind of codes they might have to apply with if the government starts bringing down carbon emissions. And that was always the intent, of course, of the EPCs, wasn't it? I know it hasn't happened, but to force people who are on G or F up there towards B or C or even A. And that may happen at some point, that we start to energy performance assess buildings and year on year work to improve them. So there's a lot of engineering involved in that. And so this guide or guidance, because it would be a number of documents, would help us to carry out that function. And then identify and promote best practices of policy, tools and resources for the implementation. So looking at good case studies and people have done it and got it right. We've got a grid building intersection working group. Obviously, that's where the suppliers come in, whether it's a gas supply or an electrical supply. How does that work well? And this is looking for a secure building grid communication system to enable integration of low carbon distributed energy resources. So coming back to this point that, for example, if a lot of solar power is being generated in an area and you don't need it, do you just ditch it? Or do you have a intelligent grid communication system that says to a building, this is a time when you should be putting this into batteries, or you need to heat up some hot water, because at the moment it's available and it's basically free. But if you don't do it now and you wait till tonight, we're going to be putting on the gas-fired power plants, and you'll be taking a lot of carbon to do that heating. So I'm throwing that as an example, of course, but you can see that if we had a proper intersection between the grid and the buildings, we could do a lot of good things that would help use available energy when it is available, and keep our demand down when it's not available, when we're relying on these fossil fuel sources. So we don't do much of that at the moment, but it wouldn't be that difficult, you can imagine, to integrate storage and other things, maybe grid load shedding. That's something we're good at already, but certainly storage could come in. Identify value to the building and value to the grid of resilience, load flexibility, controls, information systems, energy storage, electrical and thermal on the customer side of the meter that are cost effective and responsive. That's part of the work they would be helping us do, or material to help us do that. What we would like to see, of course, is some sort of grid sales cost that encourages that, makes it worth our clients' while. Identify optimize response of buildings to signals from the grid. The next group is the Building Standards and Codes Working Group. This is looking to find international standards and codes organisation cooperation with the work group's activities. So, REVA and SIBSI, UK regulations, European regulations, Scandinavian, and see how those codes fit in with the work we're doing here. Identify what already exists, determine technical guidance that we can produce and new standards, identify new standards, guidelines, other resources to help this happen, evaluate ways to reconfigure monitoring and compliance standards to satisfy decarbonisation based requirements and government policies, and to promote development of best practices, zero carbon design guidance for new and existing commercial and residential property for all climatic zones. So that's hot, cold, air conditioned, dry, everything. They'll all be different, of course, but we need to identify how it is done in these places and flag up best practice for everyone's benefit. The next group, I'm nearly through all the groups, by the way, the Appliance and Equipment Standards Working Group. So this really dives into the particular things we're going to use, like a boiler or an air conditioning plant, air handling unit. We want to review the various methods being used globally to quantify the total carbon emissions from appliance and equipment use. At the moment, we just talk about the whole building, or maybe we talk about the system, but this really gets down to saying, well, that particular boiler is where you're producing all your carbon. The pump and the pipes are okay, it's the boiler, and how we can improve on that. Report suitability of current equipment and system performance. This will start to push the manufacturing industry towards lower carbon equipment, as you can imagine. Develop guidance for manufacturers on a practical and repeatable way to calculate life cycle carbon emissions and embodied carbon in HVAC equipment. Produce a roadmap to close gaps identified in the calculation methods, and work with industry and government to identify an acceptable and practical method for providing total carbon impacts for our mechanical systems, HVAC, hot water, heating, those systems. Produce a product and service portfolio of standards, tools and guidelines to ensure an unbiased approach. So that's a common theme here, is of course, whatever's going on, we must come out of this with information that helps our members learn and apply these things. So it's not just a research exercise into what's going on, it's really aimed at producing better knowledge transfer to the members. And then here in the Training and Education Working Group, we're talking about what kind of publications are needed to support all this work, creating an inventory of Ashrae and other organisations' resources that we can tap into, and then make sure that our members benefit from training, education. It may be that we have certification programs and competency programs, something this country here in the UK badly needs. But that would be good to have that come through, so that people can say, yes, I am competent to come and help you get your carbon down because I've done this training and I know what I'm doing. So that's been good. There's a site sequestration working group as well, which is a bit different, but this is looking at carbon sequestration, where carbon that we produce is caught and absorbed either in the ocean, terrestrial, geological, or perhaps just put down into the ground, into containers. And you've heard of that being discussed here in the UK as well. So they're looking at how realistic that is and how it could be done, and how that impacts upon us as Ashrae members. We're usually, most of us are doing buildings, but this is somewhere that we might have an interest and might feel responsible in doing this. And I think you heard the other week, of course, that the UK food industry is running out of CO2 for producing food and transportation of food. So it may be that if we can capture carbon that's being produced as a result of our HVAC activities, we can then sell that on, rather than just pumping it into the atmosphere. Identify technologies that can be used on sites, what we could do about that as Ashrae, and frame the issues associated with this initiative, and then establish some tools to help frame that journey. So that is, I've run through there the 8 subgroups of the main task force. The main task force isn't doing the work, the subgroups are, but we've broken it down into those 8 areas. And say I'm on the operational one because that is of most interest to me. It's looking at the building and how the building produces carbon. And then this is being fed back in to the whole, and we're starting to produce information which will go on the website at some point. At the moment, it's in Basecamp, which is like a kind of repository of all the information that is going on, a bit of a filing system, really. But what is clear is that people are really getting on with this. So I've got a couple of examples just to finish with. This is a building in Maryland. It's a big building, actually. It's called the Unisphere, opened a couple of years ago. And the company did this because they wanted to, engineers didn't come and persuade them to do it. The company wanted to be the largest commercial net zero building at that time. It goes way beyond just sticking a few solar panels on and LED lights. It's taken a holistic approach, and it's come up with the result, which is zero carbon. Uses a whole mix of different technologies. This is a staircase view inside it. I've taken a couple of pictures from the website just to show. They realise that burning fossil fuels to deliver heat and power to buildings accounts for about 30% of US greenhouse gas emissions. So they found other ways of doing this. This is in California in 2017. They actually approved their first net zero building code. So they're already applying net zero as a requirement for new build in California. And they will be requiring all new residential construction by 2020 and all commercial by 2030. So they've put those pegs in the ground, and that's what they're working at. Mayors from other cities have committed as well, as we have in the UK. And I said, when I gave that figure for Manchester of 2039, that is actually total carbon. It's existing buildings as well as new. So to some extent, some of our cities are being more ambitious than this. And so we as the industry that deliver have to come up with the wherewithal to do that. This is a picture from that particular project. It's a corridor with daylight coming in. During the day, surplus power from the building's numerous systems, which include 3,000 solar panels, is sold back to the grid. So there'll be a balancing act there, quid pro quo for anything they draw later. Minimal power in the evenings, but in total they deliver more power than they bring in. This is one of my case studies completed some time ago, actually. It's the Ridgeway City Learning Centre and School. is a two-storey building actually added on to an existing school. You can see the school in the background there. It's that grey concrete 1960s building, a pretty poor quality construction by modern standards, of course. But it's linked to the new two-storey construction by an atrium that you can see. And the new building is obviously well insulated and well sealed. And it uses natural ventilation to drive it. It's got a central atrium, and it's actually completely zero carbon. This is the space in between, which is linking at ground level and at first level with that bridge link across into the two-storey building back to the old school that you can see just over there. And the way I achieved zero carbon there was actually, it's quite interesting. I thought it would be a good cost saving not to put a boiler house in this new building at all, but to take our heating from the existing boiler house in the old school over there, and to change their existing boiler plant from pretty inefficient gas boilers to modulating condensing boilers. And the improvement in energy was more than we used in the new building, more than we used for electricity and heating actually. So by changing boilers to run the whole school on condensing boilers, we were able to put a complete new extension up as a zero energy and zero carbon building in its own right, and reduce the carbon of the existing building. So that was about 20 years ago actually. So maybe we should be more ambitious these days, but it was an interesting way of doing things. This is another one which we're just looking at the moment. The Institution of Mechanical Engineers is about to refurbish its headquarters in London. This is a building we know quite well as Ashrae, because we have had our annual awards night there every year until COVID struck, of course. But in October, we've had the awards nights, and the student that's won has gone to the Ashrae winter meeting as a result. So it's an old historic building, pretty inefficient to be honest, but it's about to be refurbished. And what the institution wants to do is to make it a net zero carbon building. So I've been given some advice as a volunteer, I might add, because I have been chair of their construction division for the last 4 years. I'm stepping down this year, but we really want to get effective ventilation in. It's really poorly ventilated at the moment, really poor. So we want proper ventilation. We want to put some UV air cleaners in so that we can recirculate that air in a safe way and not spread COVID. I want to certainly get to net zero carbon as a result of the project as a whole. And one of the ways of doing that will be to connect to the Westminster district heat scheme, which is being installed in the streets of Westminster. This is a scheme that will serve the Houses of Parliament and other government buildings in the area, but it's a newish district heat scheme that's going to really feed this part of the city. So that makes a lot of sense. Instead of using gas in this building, connect to a DH scheme, which will be decarbonised over the next 5 years. We want to use decarbonised electrical supplies, of course, and look for other good practices such as daylighting, low energy lighting controls and so forth. And finally, just to finish on this one, this is as we move in with COVID, we have to really improve what we do in terms of ventilation and HVAC. And we are already seeing buildings coming through. This is one in Chicago, which is a post-COVID building, safe to use. And they have used enhanced air filtration, widely spaced offices, touchless features, and that is in order to avoid COVID spread. So we have to do that without creating any carbon in a net zero carbon way. So that's completed my presentation and summation. So I'll stop there and ask us any questions or comments. I think I've left some time.
Frank, thank you so much. That was really very informative. And yes, we have a couple of questions in the chat box. If that's okay, I'll answer those.
Sure.
The first one says, do you think the digital technology or BIM could help the zero carbon holistic framework?
BIM and BMS controls, digital controls.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's we've not really taken advantage of those smart controls at all, in my opinion. It is a big area we need to worry about, actually, because I think when we do look at this seriously in terms of applying the technology, and particularly in existing buildings, we have generations of different BMS languages into a system where it's been extended or altered or changed. So unless you rip out the whole system and put another one in, you've got this communication problem between one part and another, which we've tried to overcome over the years, and people have done their best. But BMSs can save an awful lot of energy and really give us a high degree of intelligence. But the fact is they don't unless they're applied properly. And I think the other part of that is the BIM area, where you go beyond that to say, well, actually, if we combine that with a better knowledge of the building systems, how the building's being used, how we operate and maintain the building, and how we refurbish it, we can really make some great benefits, which really works us up through BIM level 1, 2, up to level 6. But we're struggling at the moment to get BIM level 2 applied properly in the UK. But if you get to BIM level 6, you've really got a very high degree of digital intelligence as well as control on the building. And it's all feasible, basically, it can be done. So for example, I'm sure many of you have done this. You go into a building and say, what we got above the ceiling here, and somebody goes to get some ladders, and you look up and you see what's in the ceiling and try and sketch it out. However, if we had recorded what was in the ceiling in a BIM model properly, we could really stand on the floor of the corridor, point our iPhone or whatever device up towards the ceiling tiles and look at what's above the building. Above the ceiling, sorry, and we would be able to see all the components in position and what they were doing. We would be able to look and see how much water was flowing through the pipe, how much heat was being delivered, how much carbon that was producing. So there's a high degree of data there which we could use, but we have to really get into it and use it, and that requires proper application of BIM. It's up to level 6 at least. And I don't see anyone doing that at the moment. There is a BIM group which I'm on. It's a government group actually, and Sibsy's on it as well. And we've met, but they do struggle really to get this technology applied in our industry. I think the other area of that which I really like is augmented reality, where we would record a project from inception through to completion. We'd record all the important meetings and data, so that in the future, maybe 10, 20 years down the line, when people are making changes to the building, they can look back and see, why the design team did what it did. Those kind of big presentation meetings you've attended where big decisions are made, and they're great meetings to have. But then when you leave and go home, they're kind of forgotten. Maybe somebody does some minutes or some drawings get produced, but that kind of moment is gone. And with augmented reality, it doesn't have to be like that. We could record those sessions and they could be entered into the BIM file as more data relating to the building. So as you walk around and think, oh, why was this done like this? It's recorded there. That information can back and explain
It's like
to you.
talking buildings, isn't it, that Frank? It's like almost like talking buildings. You say you wish the walls could talk. Right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. And you record, I mean, the meetings are one thing, of course, but when you get to site, you can record the guy doing the soldering. Maybe not every bit of soldering, but or welding, but you could record the day they do the commissioning. Did this flow rate doesn't look right. Did anyone ever commission it properly? And you could be there and say, well, here I'm commissioning it. Here's the dial, and you can see it's on 5 litres a second. My water flow rate is 5 litres a second. And you can see, well, on that day, that was the flow rate they had. So what's gone wrong to make that different? So we could all record all those moments of installation, construction, commissioning, all the important bits in the life of a building, as you say, and then it can talk back to you.
Yeah.
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 Yep.
That sounds pretty cool. And actually, from the same person again, Hua Zong. I hope I pronounced it correctly. She also said, "What is your suggestion about the balanced air quality and energy consumption, especially for historical buildings? Do we have a repeatable process to follow?"
Yeah, I would say air quality is essential. So there has been this paradigm shift paper that's been published, which is saying that we have taken air quality for granted for far too long, and we need to do something about it. And I totally agree with that. I think we need to put much more effort into air quality, and if that requires energy to do it, then we're going to have to use energy. Interestingly enough, with some of the problems we've had with COVID. The quick fix has been to put in some sort of recirculating air cleaner, a UV air cleaner or a HEPA filter. Not other things really. They're not really proven at this stage. If you look on the Ashrae website, there's quite a lot of so-called emerging technologies like ozone and things like that, disinfectant in the air. And the advice at the moment is kind of hold back a bit because there's things can go wrong with that. I mean, ozone and people don't mix too well. But anyway, if you use those devices to clean the air and recirculate it, then you're not really using much energy, but you're getting great air quality. So the Institution of Mechanical Engineers that I showed you was interesting, because I did go down to advise them how to open and using recirculating devices like that. I was shocked to be told that the building doesn't have a ventilation supply system. It's all extract. So I said, well, it doesn't comply with the building regulations. I mean, it clearly says in the regulations that you must supply air into all occupied rooms, not extract it. The problem with extraction is we don't really know where it's coming from. It might be coming from the room next door, which has already been used. So if we want good air quality, we have to do that. So that's our first point. We have to look after the health, safety and well-being of the occupants, and we have to make sure they can perform properly with good productivity. And then we have to do that in a zero carbon manner by using whatever technologies we need.
Thank you. We have Maru's hand up. I will let her ask the question herself directly.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks very much, Frank, for excellent presentation. These forces, these task forces, when is the deadline? When are they going to produce something? Because it's a very, considering lots of countries, lots of situations. And what format would it be? Would it all be guidelines or software? How are you going to manage it?
Yeah, I think we'll be working on this till next summer, probably. I'm probably going to go to Las Vegas myself to attend some of the meetings and meet people, but I think the realistic output would be by next summer you'll start seeing information come out. So the format's going to be interesting, but I think the first thing to say is they may well, at the first level, give us the infographic they produced for the COVID work, the COVID task force infographic. So if you look online at that, it's amazing. There's 500 pages of information, but you go in through one at a time on different levels. You can say, well, first of all, answer what do we do about COVID? So you could say, what do I do about decarbonisation? So well, what are you interested in, operational carbon or embedded? So you go to the next level and you work your way down these levels, and it gives you access very quickly and very easily to a lot of really good information. So that's called an infographic, and I'm saying that because that's we were told the other day that it's had 9.3 billion hits. That's been a great success for Ashrae to have 9.3 billion users go in and use that material. But I think the other thing I showed you there was that there'll be a lot of other guidance coming out, and certainly possibly some standards. And then they're very keen on the CPD, and this kind of talk I'm doing, maybe DL lectures on it. Ashrae also do these short courses, which are good. You can do a 3-hour short course and get a certificate from that. What we're lacking in the UK, we're really bad at this actually, is any method of showing people that we're actually competent. So, Frank Mills, chartered engineer, he can do a job, but so can Tom, Dick and Harry, because we can't differentiate. Whereas with North America, and I'm sure you've seen this, they have a certificate to say they're a low carbon engineer, and that means something. The client is going to use them because they've got that. He's not going to use Tom, Dick and Harry. because that wouldn't be sensible, but it wouldn't be legal either. So I'm straying a little bit here, Maru, but I think with the Hackett inquiry that's going on into Grenfell Tower, we will see a really big push to introduce competency for all these professions, including ourselves. And I welcome that personally, you know, because when I say something, it will mean something, not just be an opinion alongside Tom, Dick, or Harry. So I think the UK should have got its act together there a long time ago, and it didn't. But it will do. So Ashrae is going to help us with that, and I really think this chapter we've got could step up and show UK government how to do it, because it doesn't know how to do it, and it's not really getting it from CIBSE or from the IMechE. It's not getting that kind of guidance. Whereas with Ashrae, it's already there. You know, if you do the Ashrae course on healthcare, you're a healthcare professional, because it's a course that it's been approved and acknowledged. And if you do that course, you will know enough to work in the healthcare industry. But here we haven't got that kind of thing. So I think in answering your question, we get a whole range.
We've lost you, Frank.
I was just going to say, is it me or is it, Frank?
It's Frank.
Okay. I think while we're waiting, I just want to show the one that I think the infographics that Frank was referring to is this one. I think it's this one, yeah. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, this is the infographics that Frank is saying that it's got about 9.3 billion visitors.
Wow.
Because each of these tabs actually is information, layer of information underneath them. So all the documents and all the other technologies. I think one of the questions was saying for the existing buildings, what is the solutions? But it's kind of saying how to make the buildings ready. I think these are the things that the solutions that they are recommending for us to review. When if you want to get to make sure the buildings are ready for COVID ready, not obviously energy, but necessarily, but the COVID ready. Okay, Frank, are you back? I think he's.
No. But there's one more question from Sam.
Yes, I was going to ask that, but we can't now.
Yeah.
Hi, Sam.
Hey, Shazia.
Yes, we will share the PowerPoint slides, right? It will be available.
Frank says he's got no longer. Okay. He's not joined us, basically. He's not available.
Okay. Okay. All right. In that case, we will forward your question to Frank, if that's okay, and we will send you back a response if that's okay. Wow.
That would be great.
Yeah, and Samuel. So we'll make a note of your questions, and then we'll send it back. Well, thank you very much, everybody. If you don't have any other questions to us, thank you for attending to Ashrae presentation. Hopefully you will be able to join to the next one as well. And if you consider joining Ashrae as a student or a member of Ashrae, or join our board, and then please get in touch with us. So it's quite a very informative.
Frank is here.
Chapter.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that. I dropped out, but that's very bad. Sorry. But anyway, I'm not sure. Were we nearly finished? But if not, you can carry on, or you can send me questions if you like. I'm sorry about that.
Questions, whether you want to stay on the line 5 more minutes to answer, or we can send them to you.
Sure. Yeah, if people are still here, I'll try and answer them.
Okay. So one question was from Samuel. He says, you mentioned there is a working group looking at other standards and measurements for environmental performance.
Yes. Yeah.
In the UK, we have SAP as the way for determining compliance to Part L, but the requirements are measured generally per area. Is this really sensible? And have Ashrae considered values per occupant or absolute CO2 emissions as ways to reduce the total carbon emissions?
Well, no, the Ashrae standard would be 90.1, which is energy, and it is based on area as well. Obviously, this group will be looking at those sort of metrics, though, looking at whether it would be better to do it with numbers of people or other ways of doing things. But at the moment, the 92.1 looks at area, and it's similar to SAPS, but it's a program that used based on the American programs. But good question. I mean, at the moment, in terms of trying to get decarbonisation, anything's up for grabs. If we can think of a better way of doing it, if you can think of a better way of doing it, certainly feed it into this process, or feed it to me, and I'll pass it into them to think about.
Awesome, thank you, Frank. Because I'm just doing my masters at the moment, although I've dropped down to the part-time, and
Yep.
I'm kind of I know that Ashrae is obviously different to this, but I'm kind of looking at this issue and tiny houses, because tiny houses have such small areas to work
Yeah.
with. It means that when you do the calculations, the numbers appear very
Yeah.
high
Yeah.
per area, but it's actually using so much less energy than a bigger building.
Good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. If you want to email me something on that, I would certainly take it up with them, because you're making a very important point that if we, one way of getting carbon down is to use less space, less stuff, should we say?
Yeah.
But that should be taken into account as well. But I'm not sure how
Thank
we'd
you. Yeah, I'll send an
incentivize.
email.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And are we okay to share your slides with the attendees?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if they're okay with them, yeah, absolutely, no problem.
Okay, in that case, yes, please. I think some of the attendees are asking. I think that's it, Frank. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah. If anybody emails me anything or a question or a comment, I will feed it into this process. I just see myself as a conduit here to help people get into the process. If there's any good comments, but otherwise, watch this space. Go on the internet, on the Ashrae website, and you'll see what's happening. There's reports go up there, and they do keep us informed. And I'm sure you'll see a lot coming through. Personally, I'm quite pleased that Ashrae's taken this lead, because we have been talking about this kind of thing for a long time here, and we haven't really got that far. So this may be the way that we save the planet at last. If this work's taken seriously, then it will have a big impact. Let's hope it does.
Absolutely, there is definitely a lot more noise now. I think everybody at a personal level feel impacted, not just COVID and the recent climate, extreme climate events. I think it's really making everybody in a normal just households to think about these things, not just building engineers or professions, but just ordinary people that are actually just thinking about and worried about it. I think that's definitely putting the pressure on the governments, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. And it does affect them, so they have to be worried. That's good, very good.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I don't think we have any other questions, but if there are any more, and like you said, if anybody would like to get in touch with you to feed in any information into your working group, that we will pass them on to you. Yeah.
Well, one final comment, because I can see the board behind you, but Ridgeway has its conference tomorrow, and its topic is net zero, isn't it?
That's right. Yes, we have guest speakers. It's for 5 hours event with workshops. That's taking place tomorrow. Yes, I think 9 in the morning.
I don't know if that's open to everybody, but I'm certainly attending that. But if it is open, maybe you could tell people.
It is open to everybody. I signed up for it, but I couldn't receive any registration confirmation yet.
Oh well.
I don't know if they are prioritizing the guests instead of company staff.
But no, I received the link to join the event, so yeah, the guest.
You have received?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Okay, it's a personal then.
So just in case people are not clear, the topic tomorrow at Ridgeway is net zero energy, net zero carbon. So that's it's spot on what we've just been talking about, and it looks like an excellent program.
Absolutely. If you go into if you sign it up, and you can on our website, you can be just put net zero, and also on our LinkedIn pages as well. I assume you can still sign up, but I know that there's over 500 people are apparently signed up for it. Yeah, so it should be good. I think we are allowed to share the slides. Maybe on the next meetings, I might be able to share the slides with the Ashrae team.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay. Marie is just saying thank you to everybody for attending, and thank you to you, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
We will see you at the next event.
Bye.
Thanks.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.